The moment everyone stops answering your calls is the moment you realize power was never yours to keep. I learned that at 2:17 a.m. with rain hitting the glass like it was trying to get in and a phone that wouldn't ring back. I used to measure my life in deals closed and rooms that went silent when I walked in. Now I measured it in how long I stared at a screen waiting for a name to light up. Nothing did. Marcus didn't pick up, not once in 10 years. He never missed. Elena didn't even leave a message. Just an empty closet and the faint smell of her perfume fading like she had already erased me. The city outside my penthouse still moved, headlights sliding through wet streets like nothing had changed, but everything had. I stood there barefoot on cold marble holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. People like me don't fall slowly, we disappear all at once. One bad night, one wrong move, one silence that stretches too long, and suddenly every door is closed. I tried one last number, someone who owed me more than loyalty, just straight to voicemail again. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Everyone stays while you're untouchable. No one stays when you're not. I set the phone down and listened, really listened to the quiet. It wasn't peaceful, it was empty, like the city had decided I no longer belonged to it. I walked past the floor to ceiling windows, the skyline reflecting back a version of me I barely recognized. No suit, no entourage, no control, just a man standing alone in a place too big for one person. I thought about leaving, grabbing whatever was left and disappearing, but something kept me there. Maybe pride, maybe denial, maybe I just didn't know how to exist without something to fight for. Then I heard it, not inside the room, outside, faint at first, a sound that didn't belong to the silence, claws against pavement, steady, unhurried, like it wasn't searching, it already knew where to go. I froze, not out of fear, but because for the first time that night something was moving toward me instead of away. The sound got closer, then stopped right outside my door. No knock, no hesitation, just presence. I didn't breathe, I didn't think, I just stood there staring at the handle, waiting for it to move, because somehow deep down I knew whoever or whatever was on the other side hadn't come to leave. I did not open the door right away, not because I was afraid, but because I was not used to anyone coming toward me without permission, without warning, without a reason. The handle stayed still for a second that felt longer than it should have. Then slowly it turned, the lock clicked, a sound too ordinary for a night like this, and the door pushed open just enough for cold air and rain to slip inside. I expected a man, a mistaken enemy, who had finally decided to finish what the silence had started. But it was not a man, it was him, standing there soaked from the storm, fur-darkened eyes, steady like he had been here before. Like this was not a question for him. Rex, I said the name before I even realized I remembered it. He did not move closer, right away. He just stood there watching me like he was measuring something, not distance, not threat, something deeper, something I had forgotten how to recognize. Loyalty does not rush, it waits. I stepped back without thinking and the door opened wider. He walked in slow, controlled, each step quiet against the marble floor, like he understood this space did not belong to him, but he had chosen to enter anyway. Water dripped from his coat, forming a small trail behind him, and still he did not shake it off, did not look away. His eyes stayed on me, and for the first time that night I felt something shift, not power, not control, something smaller, something harder to define. I closed the door behind him, and the city disappeared again, just rain against glass, and the sound of breathing, mine uneven, his steady. I let out a breath. I did not know I was holding you, should not be here, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. You had your chance to leave. He tilted his head slightly like he heard something else in my voice, something I was not saying out loud. I remembered the night I first saw him, not as a companion, not as anything close to that. He was a problem, caught in a situation that had nothing to do with mercy. He stood his ground back then, too surrounded, outnumbered, still refusing to break. I did not save him because I cared, I saved him because I recognized something useful, something that did not bend easily. And now here he was, not because he owed me, not because he needed me, but because he chose to stay. I sank into the chair near the window, the leather cold against my skin, the weight of the past 48 hours pressing down harder than anything I had faced before. You know, everyone else left, I said, the words tasting strange, like I was hearing them for the first time out loud. No response, no reaction, just those eyes locked on mine, steady, unchanging, like the truth did not need to be explained. I laughed once, low and short. I used to think loyalty was something you could build, something you could control. Turns out I was wrong. He took a step closer, then another, until he was just a few feet away, close enough that I could hear his breathing, close enough that the distance between us no longer felt like a wall. I did not reach for him, I did not move at all, and neither did he. We just stood there in the quiet, something unspoken settling between us, and for the first time since everything fell apart I realized the silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt like something had returned, and I was not ready to understand what it meant yet. I did not remember the last time I shared a room with something that did not expect anything from me. No deals, no promises, no silent calculations, just presence. Rex lowered himself onto the floor slowly, like he had decided this was where he belonged, not by permission, not by ownership, just choice. I watched him for a long second, trying to understand why that unsettled me more than betrayal ever did. Maybe because betrayal made sense, it followed rules. This did not. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen, more out of habit than need. The city taught me to keep moving even when there was nowhere to go. I poured A glass of water, my hand steady now, not because things were better but because there was nothing left to lose, I said. Another bowl on the floor, filled it halfway without thinking. When I turned back, he had not moved, still watching, still waiting, like he was giving me time to catch up to something he already understood. "You always like this?" I asked quietly, the question hanging in the air without expectation. He stepped forward, finally, slow, measured, and stopped just short of the bowl, not touching it, not even looking at it. His eyes stayed on me. I exhaled a small breath, almost a laugh. "You are not here for that, are you?" The realization settled deeper than I expected. He was not here for food, not shelter, not survival. He was here for me. The thought felt unfamiliar, like a language I used to know but forgot how to speak. I leaned back against the counter and let the silence stretch. It was different now, not empty, not heavy, just quiet, like a space waiting to be filled with something real. I remembered the reports, the way they described dogs like him, trained, disciplined, loyal, to commands, to structure, to purpose, but no one ever talked about this, the part where they choose where they stand when no one is telling them what to do. I slid down into the chair again, the same one from before, but it felt different now, less like a place to fall, more like a place to stay for a moment. "You could leave," I said again, softer this time, almost testing the idea out loud. "The door is not locked, the city is still out there." He blinked once, slow, calm, and did not move. I nodded to myself, like I had been given an answer without words. It hit me then, not all at once, but enough to shift something inside me. Everyone who left had a reason: fear, money, survival, maybe even truth. I could understand all of it, but this had no reason, no benefit, no advantage, just presence, and something about that made everything else feel smaller. I looked at him again, really looked at him, not as a memory, not as a consequence, but as something real in front of me. "Right now," you stayed, I said, the words barely above a whisper, like I was afraid saying them too loud would break whatever this was. His ears twitched slightly, and he took one more step closer, closing the distance. I did not reach out. I did not need to. Something had already crossed that space long before I understood it, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was waiting for something to end. I felt like something had just begun, and I had no idea what it would cost me this time. I did not sleep that night, not because I could not, but because I did not trust what would be there. When I woke up, the rain faded sometime before dawn, leaving the city washed clean like nothing had happened, but I knew better. Cities do not forget, they just wait. I stayed in that chair longer than I should have, listening to the quiet, measuring it against the noise. I used to live in Rex, never moved far from where he settled. At some point during the night, he lay down near the door, not blocking it, not guarding it, just there, like a line that did not need to be crossed. I noticed it, the way his body angled slightly toward me, even in rest, like part of him stayed alert without effort. I used to pay men to do that, trained professionals who watched every entrance, every shadow, and still somehow everything slipped through. But him, he did not scan the room, he did not check corners, he just stayed, and somehow that felt stronger than anything I had built on control. I stood up slowly, my body stiff from hours of stillness, and walked toward the window. The skyline looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more honest, like you could see the cracks if you stared long enough. I pressed my hand against the glass, cool and steady, and tried to remember the last time I saw this city without thinking about how to own it. Now it just existed without me, and that realization should have broken something, but it did not. It just settled like truth. I turned back and saw him watching again, not intense, not demanding, just present, like he had accepted whatever this was. Before I did, I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, the weight familiar, even if everything else was not. I hesitated for a second, not because I was unsure about leaving, but because I was not sure if he would follow. "You do not have to come," I said quietly, the words automatic, like I was still trying to give him an out. He stood up without hesitation, stretched once, slow, controlled, then walked toward me, stopping just close enough to make it clear he had already decided. I nodded once more to myself and reached for the door. The hallway outside was too quiet, the kind of quiet that used to mean safety. Now it just felt empty. I stepped out and he followed. No leash, no command, no signal, just choice again. We moved toward the elevator, each step echoing more than it should have. I caught my reflection in the metal doors when they slid open, a man who looked like he had lost something he could not replace and gained something he did not understand yet. The doors closed, and for a second everything went still, just the hum of descent and the sound of breathing, two different rhythms finding the same space. I glanced down at him once, then back up at the numbers, dropping one by one. I used to know exactly where I was going before I even moved. Now I had no plan, no map, no certainty, just a direction forward and something beside me that refused to turn away. And as the elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened to a city that no longer belonged to me, I realized I was not stepping back into the life I had lost. I was stepping into something else, something quieter, something I had never learned how to survive before I stepped out into the street. And the air felt different, not cleaner, not safer, just real, the kind of real you cannot negotiate with. Traffic moved like it always did. People passed by without looking twice, and for the first time in years, I was just another man standing on a sidewalk with no one watching, no one waiting, no one reporting back. I should have felt exposed. Instead, I felt invisible, and that was something I did not know how to handle. Rex stayed close, not pressed against me, not trailing behind, just beside me, like we were moving on the same line without needing To agree on it, I walked without direction, at first letting instinct try to take over, but instinct had been trained for a different life, one that no longer existed. Every turn I used to take led somewhere specific, a meeting, a deal, a decision. Now every street looked the same, long stretches of concrete and glass with no destination attached. I stopped at a corner, the light above blinking red, then green, then red again, like it was waiting for me to decide something I was not ready to decide yet. You ever notice how loud silence is? I said quietly, more to fill the space than expecting an answer. Rex shifted slightly, his ears catching something distant, something I did not hear. I followed his gaze down the street, but saw nothing unusual, just people moving, cars passing, the normal rhythm of a city that did not care who I used to be. I took a breath deep, slow, and stepped forward, crossing without thinking about it. He moved with me, same pace, same direction, no hesitation. We walked for what felt like miles, maybe it was only a few blocks, but without a destination. Distance stretches differently. I passed places I used to own, restaurants, offices, buildings that once carried my name in ways that never appeared on paper. Now they look smaller, not because they changed, but because I no longer stood above them. I was just outside looking in, and no one noticed. The realization did not hurt the way I expected it to. It just settled again, like everything else had been settling into something quieter, something stripped down to what was left after everything unnecessary was gone. I stopped near a small coffee shop, one I had never entered before, too ordinary, too exposed. Back then I would have sent someone else or avoided it entirely. Now I stood there staring at the door like it was something unfamiliar. Rex looked up at me, then at the door, then back again, not pushing, not pulling, just observing. I let out a breath and reached for the handle. It felt heavier than it should have, like opening it meant more than just stepping inside. The bell rang softly when the door opened. A simple sound, but it cut through everything inside me. The warmth hit first, then the smell, coffee, something baked, something real. People inside glanced up for a second, then went back to their conversations. No recognition, no fear, no shift in tone. I walked to the counter, slow, deliberate, not out of control but out of awareness. Every movement mattered now because it was mine, not directed, not expected, just chosen. I ordered something simple, black coffee, the kind I never used to drink because I never needed to. The cup felt warm in my hand, grounding in a way I had not felt in years. I turned slightly and found a seat near the window. Rex settled beside the chair like he had done it 1,000 times before, like this was normal, like this was enough. I looked down at him, then out at the street, and for the first time since everything collapsed I realized I was not trying to get anything back. I was trying to figure out what was left and why it was still here. I wrapped my hands around the cup and let the heat settle into my skin like it had something to prove, the kind of warmth that does not ask questions, just exists. People around me talked quietly, laughter in short bursts, spoons against ceramic chairs shifting against the floor, small sounds that used to disappear under the noise of my old life. Now they stood out, clear, defined, like every detail mattered. When nothing else did, I took a sip, bitter, simple, no layers, no distractions, and realized I had spent years avoiding things that did not come with control. Rex stayed close, his head slightly lowered, but his eyes never fully resting, always aware, not tense, just present. I watched him for a moment, then looked back out the window. The street kept moving, same as before, but I felt separate from it, like I was seeing it from the outside for the first time, not as something to shape, but something to understand. A man walked past in a construction jacket, talking on his phone, his voice calm, steady, like his world made sense. A woman pushed a stroller, adjusting a blanket without breaking her stride. Life continued without permission, without hesitation, and none of it needed me. That thought should have made me feel small, but it did not. It made things clearer. I had built everything on being needed, on being the center of movement, and once that was gone I thought nothing would be left, but I was wrong. Something quieter remained, something that did not depend on anyone else recognizing it. I set the cup down slowly, the sound soft against the table, and leaned back slightly, my eyes drifting back to Rex. You ever wonder what you are supposed to do after everything you were built for disappears? I asked the question low, not expecting an answer. He shifted again, just enough to meet my gaze, and held it steady. No confusion, no doubt, just presence, like the answer was not something to say but something to be. I let out a slow breath and nodded to myself. Maybe that was it. Maybe the problem was I kept looking for direction when what I needed was stillness. The door opened again, the bell ringing soft, and I felt it before I saw it. Not danger, not exactly, just a shift in the room, subtle enough that most people would miss it, but not me, not after everything I had learned, and not him. Rex lifted his head slightly, his body still relaxed, but something in his posture sharpened, not aggressive, not reactive, just aware, like he had noticed the same thing I did. I did not turn right away. I did not need to. I had spent too long reacting first, thinking later. Now I stayed still, letting the moment unfold around me. Footsteps moved closer, then paused somewhere behind my chair. I took another sip of coffee, slow, deliberate, and finally turned just enough to catch a reflection in the window, a figure standing there, not familiar, not yet, but not random either. Something about the way they stood, the way they waited, told me this was not coincidence. I felt the weight of the past press in, slightly, not overwhelming, just present, like a reminder that whatever I stepped into next would not be simple. I looked down at Rex once, then back toward the reflection, and for the first time since I walked out of that building I did not feel unprepared. I felt ready, not to control, not to dominate, but to face whatever was coming next, without running, without reaching for what I used to be. And as the figure finally took a step Closer, I realized this quiet life I had just started to understand was already beginning to change. I did not turn fully at first. I let the reflection tell me what I needed to know. Posture steady. Not rushed, not hesitant, someone who knew exactly where they were standing and why. Rex shifted closer, not stepping in front of me, not blocking, just aligning his body slightly between me and the unknown, like he was adjusting to a line only he could see. I set the cup down gently, the sound barely there, and let the silence stretch one more second before I spoke. You picked the wrong place if you are looking for something from me. My voice came out calm, even to my own ears, no edge, no weight behind it. Just truth. The figure stepped into view, then not close enough to invade, not far enough to be ignored. A man, late 30s, maybe early 40s, dressed simple, nothing that stood out, which in itself stood out in a city like this. His eyes moved once across the room, then settled on me, not aggressive, not friendly, just certain. I heard you might be hard to find these days, he said, his voice low, controlled, like someone used to being listened to. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed what I already knew. Disappearing never really means gone, it just means harder to reach. I leaned back slightly, keeping my posture loose. I am sitting right here, I said. You did not have to look very hard. He nodded, once acknowledging the point, but not stepping away. Not yet. Rex let out a slow breath, not a warning, not tension, just awareness, his presence steady like a constant in a situation that used to require 10 different variables. I watched the man carefully, not for what he said, but for what he did not say. The pauses, the distance, the way his hands stayed visible, not reaching, not hidden. He was not here to threaten, not directly, at least. That kind of approach belonged to a different world, the one I had already walked away from. I am not here for trouble, he continued, just information. That word sat between us heavier than it should have. Information always came with a price, whether you paid it up front or later depended on how well you understood the game. I glanced down at Rex, then back up and met the man's eyes. You are talking to someone who does not trade in that anymore, I said slowly, making sure each word landed where it needed to. He studied me for a moment, like he was measuring whether that was truth or strategy. Then he exhaled quietly, not disappointed, not surprised, just adjusting. I think you still do, he said softly. You just have not decided what matters yet. The words did not hit like a challenge, they felt like a mirror. I did not respond right away because part of me knew he was not wrong. I just had not figured out what I was willing to hold on to and what I was ready to leave behind completely. Rex took one small step forward, then stopped again, not closing distance, just marking it like a boundary that did not need to be explained. The man noticed it. I could see it in the slight shift of his eyes, the recognition, not fear, not discomfort, just understanding. He is loyal, he said, almost to himself. I shook my head once. No, he is not loyal, I corrected. He chose to stay. There is a difference that seemed to settle something in the air, not tension, not conflict, just clarity. The man nodded again, slower this time, then reached into his pocket, carefully, deliberate, not sudden, and placed a small folded piece of paper on the table between us. He did not push it toward me, did not explain it, just left it there like an option, then stepped back one pace, giving space without breaking contact. You might want to know who else has not left, he said quietly, then turned and walked toward the door, not rushing, not looking back. The bell rang once as he stepped outside, and the room returned to its quiet rhythm like nothing had changed. I stared at the paper for a long second, then down at Rex. His eyes moved from me to the table, then back again, waiting, not for a command, not for permission, just present like always. And I realized whatever came next was not going to be about getting anything back. It was going to be about deciding what I was willing to face again, and why I did not touch the paper right away, not because I was afraid of what was on it, but because I knew the moment I opened it, something would shift again, and I had just started to understand the quiet. I had stepped into the coffee, had gone lukewarm in my hand, forgotten somewhere between thought and hesitation. Rex remained still beside me, his presence steady like a constant I could measure against everything else that no longer made sense. I finally reached forward, slow, deliberate, and unfolded the paper, the sound soft but louder than it should have been in my head. A single line, no name, no explanation, just an address and a time: tonight, 9:40 p.m. I stared at it longer than necessary, letting the simplicity settle in, because nothing in my life had ever been this simple before. Everything used to come layered, hidden behind intentions, behind leverage, behind outcomes. This was just a place and a moment, nothing more, which somehow made it more dangerous than anything else. I leaned back in the chair again, the paper still in my hand, and looked out the window. The city moved the same way it had an hour ago, cars passing, people talking, lives continuing without interruption. But now there was a point in it, a direction, whether I wanted it or not. You see that, I said quietly, holding the paper slightly without looking at him. Rex shifted his gaze to it for a second, then back to me, not reacting, not questioning, just acknowledging, like he understood that whatever this was, it was mine to decide. I let out a slow breath and ran my thumb along the edge of the paper, thinking about the man who left it, the way he spoke, the way he watched, not like someone looking for control, but like someone waiting to see what I would do with what was given to me. That was new in my world. Nothing was ever given without expectation, but this felt different, not clean, not safe, just open, like a door that did not force you through it. I folded the paper again, smaller this time, and slipped it into my jacket pocket, the motion automatic, but the meaning behind it not so simple. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping lightly against the floor, drawing a glance or two From nearby tables then fading again into the background like I was already becoming invisible. Rex stood with me without delay, no command, no signal, just movement aligned with mine. I dropped a few bills on the table, more than enough, and turned toward the door. The bell rang again as we stepped outside the air cooler, now the light shifting toward evening shadows, stretching longer across the pavement. Time was already moving, whether I chose to follow it or not. I paused just outside the shop, my eyes drifting down the street, then back up toward the skyline. I used to own pieces of that view, now it did not belong to me at all, and maybe that was why I could finally see it clearly. No distortion, no ambition, just structure and space. I reached into my pocket again, feeling the folded paper between my fingers, a simple thing holding more weight than anything I had carried before. I did not know who was waiting at that address. I did not know what they wanted or what it would cost, but I knew one thing for certain: this was not about reclaiming anything I had lost. This was about deciding who I was without it. I glanced down at Rex once, his eyes already on me, steady, calm like always. Then I started walking, not fast, not hesitant, just forward toward something I did not understand yet, and for the first time since everything changed, I was not trying to control what came next. I was choosing to meet it. I reached the address 5 minutes early, not because I wanted to, but because I needed the time to feel the place before stepping into it. The building stood quiet between two older storefronts, nothing flashy, nothing hidden, just there like it had been waiting longer than I had. The street lights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, and for a moment I stood still, watching the entrance like it might tell me something before I crossed that line. Rex stopped beside me, his posture calm but aware, his gaze moving once across the street, then back to the door like he was mapping the space in a way I no longer tried to control. I slipped my hand into my jacket, feeling the folded paper again, still there, still simple, still heavier than it should have been. "You can stay," I said quietly, glancing down at him, not as an order, not even as a suggestion, just an option. He did not move, not an inch, not a shift, just that steady presence that had followed me through everything. I nodded once more to myself and stepped forward. The door opened easier than I expected. No resistance, no sound, just a quiet entry into a space that felt removed from the city outside. The air inside was warmer, dim lights, low ceiling, a place designed not to be noticed. A man sat at a table near the back, not the one from before, someone older, late 50s, maybe, hair graying at the edges, posture relaxed but deliberate, like every movement had already been considered. He did not look surprised when I approached. He simply gestured to the chair across from him like I had always been expected to sit there. I pulled the chair out slowly, the scrape against the floor soft, controlled, and took my seat. Rex settled beside me without needing to be told, his body angled slightly outward, watching the room in that quiet way that had become familiar. The man studied me for a moment, then his eyes shifted to Rex and back again. "You kept him," he said, his voice calm, not questioning. Just noting. I shook my head slightly. "He kept me." That seemed to land somewhere between us, not fully understood, but not dismissed either. The man leaned back, folding his hands together on the table. "I wondered how long it would take for you to stop looking for what you lost and start seeing what stayed." I did not answer right away because I was not sure I had fully done that yet, but I was closer than I had been this morning. "You sent the paper," I said, instead, keeping the moment grounded. He nodded once. "Yes, and you came." "Not everyone would." I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, not quite agreement. "I am not everyone anymore." He watched me carefully, like that answer mattered more than anything else that could have been said. Then he reached into his coat and placed something on the table, not pushing it forward, just letting it rest there between us, a small object, simple, worn, something that did not belong in a place like this. I looked down at it, then back at him. "What is it?" I asked, my voice steady. He held my gaze for a second longer before answering. "It is the only thing that was not taken from you when everything else disappeared." The words settled deeper than I expected. I reached forward slowly, not rushed, not hesitant, and picked it up. The weight real, the edges familiar in a way I could not explain yet. Rex shifted slightly closer, his presence grounding like always, and as I turned the object in my hand, trying to understand what it meant, I realized this was not about the past catching up to me. This was about something I had never seen clearly before, something that had been there all along, waiting for me to finally look at it. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I understood this was not the end of what I had lost, it was the beginning of what I had never learned to keep.